So we're on half past now. We've got 150 in there. That's likely to go up. So we're actually going to start with some really quick introductions in case you don't know everyone who's in the room. I'll start with myself. Good news is I'm not going to be doing a lot of talking today. I'm merely playing the host, and I'm going to be shining a torch in the sort of deep, dark recesses of these three wonderful people's brains over the next hour or so. I work for an organization called Flow State, which is my business, and we're on a quest to continue to give the sales community, sellers community, I should say, top quality content that's designed to not only improve sellers, but actually raise the expectation of sellers and also the perception of sellers in 2023. So, Todd, why don't we start with you, because you're in my top left. Why don't you give us a brief intro?
Yeah, I mean, speaking of deep, dark recesses of our brains, I don't even know where to start there, but a B plus sales rep turned sales leader, had a really good run. Like a lunatic, I quit my job and wrote a book called The Transparency Sale. And for some reason, people fell in love with it. I just wrote a new book called The Transparent Sales Leader. But in the deep, dark recesses of the back of my brain, my hobby, when cool people are doing cool things on the weekends, I'm reading late 1800s, early 1900s books on sales and sales leadership. And my wife thinks I'm the biggest nerd on the planet, but hopefully I can bring some of that stuff to the table today too.
Well, first of all, she's absolutely right. You are the biggest nerd on the planet. But it's worth noting, right, that what Todd doesn't know about selling and the history of selling just simply isn't worth knowing. You're a remarkable brain when it comes to this. Anthony, let's jump over to you.
I'm the author of a blog called thesalesblog.com, and I've written 4 books on the modern sales approach and 1 book on leading growth.
Awesome. And your blog is fantastic, by the way. I recommend anyone go and follow your blog. It's brilliant. And the output of work that you do is phenomenal as well. I don't know how you find the time, to be perfectly honest with you. And lastly, but certainly not leastly, Matt, let's jump over to you.
Yeah, great to be with everyone today. As you heard earlier, the crew here did their best to kick me off this call and mislead me, but I found my way onto it. So you're stuck with me for the next hour. So Matt Dixon, I'm a founding partner of a firm called DCM Insights, which is based in the DC area. I spent most of my career as a researcher working with the gentleman we were talking about earlier, Brent Adamson, running research for a company called CEV, which was later acquired by Gartner Group. Our company right now is focused is a smaller research outfit, and which we call the Customer Understanding Lab. So we're out there trying to understand how customer buying behavior is changing, and maybe we can provide some insight into some of the questions we're going to be talking about today. So I am not probably one of the only guy on this call who's not a sales guy. I'm a researcher by trade. I show a lot of enthusiasm about sales, but I don't actually do it. So I have a ton of respect for those who actually practice the craft. But if I can help with data and research, that's what I'm here for. So
Awesome.
You're sort of an anthropologist of some kind.
Yeah.
So that's like you're looking at us like monkeys. You're saying I'm studying them. What are they doing? Why are they doing it this way?
Why are they doing that?
Right.
Exactly.
There you go.
What a job. Also, it's worth mentioning as well that I think Matt's being quite modest when he doesn't mention the fact that he's also the co-author of The Challenge of Sale and his brilliant book, The Jolt Effect, which I personally think is one of the best pieces of sales literature that's come out over the last 10 years or so. So definitely get your hands on a copy of that. So let's start off with a bit of diagnosis, right? There was a fascinating statistic that came out of Gartner recently, which is 72% of buyers would prefer a rep-free experience when going on their buying journey or when purchasing something. I mean, that's pretty damning. So what do we think the problem is at the moment? And I think this is going to be a long question. I think it's going to be multi-layered. But what do we think the problem actually is? Anthony, why don't we start with you?
I'm going to just lay all of this at the feet of the legacy approach to sales. And if you can't create any value for the person that's sitting across from you, then you're going to make sure that everybody that they come in contact with that has the title salesperson is going to have a very difficult time even just getting in the room. And if you decide that you're going to start by talking about your company, even though that's all the same information that's on your website, and then you're going to show them logos. So you got your trophy stack that you want to show people, all these scalps that you have. And then you're going to ask them about what kind of problems they have. If that's what you do, they don't really need you. Like they can go 2 clicks, they're going to be at your website. They can get that same information. So what's happening is if you can't create any value, you're not going to have any kind of engagement with a real buyer. And what I've had 5 very large companies, all with revenues in billions, who have confessed to me, we can get the first meeting, but we can't get a second meeting. And they can't get a second meeting because they failed the audition in the first meeting and nobody's given you a second chance. That's what I believe this is.
Todd, have you got anything to add to that?
Oh man, it's like pull the string.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean,
meat on the table.
like, yeah, exactly. You're
It's going to
asking
be
the
like
wrong guy.
piling on here, right?
Exactly. Well,
And another thing.
yeah, I mean, the quote you've heard me say before, Aaron, is buyers know more nowadays, right? And the fact is that those 4 words are from Thomas Herbert Russell's 1912 book called Salesmanship, right? Back in a time where there was a concern that the rise of cataloging and mail ordering was going to spell the demise of the sales professional. What do we need them anymore for? I'm going to read a quick quote and I'll let everybody guess. Is this from the 1940s or from the 2020s? And I'll give you a hint. It's from the 1940s. The quote is, today, people are educated to so many wants. The instruments of advertising are so universal. The sense of comparative buying is so keen that truth and value have made selling a profession. That is 1947. You fast forward to 2015 when Forrester was predicting that 1 million B2B sales jobs would go away by 2020 and that hundreds of thousands of college students wouldn't graduate into the profession. And what happened in each one of those instances? The opposite. Because of that last line, truth and value have made the selling a profession, goes back to one of my favorite all-time sales quotes. It's from Arthur Sheldon in his 1911 book, The Art of Selling. And he says that true salesmanship is the science of service. Grasp that thought firmly and never let go. The 72% is because so many of us let go, right? If we get back to truth and value, making selling a profession, that's how we start to get this back, but there's too many that aren't doing it.
But before we move to Matt, I just have to say, this woman that lives with this man, like, she's suffering. We know this. This is the dinner conversation for this poor woman. I'm going to say a prayer for her right now.
Yeah, sorry. She's right outside the door here. We'll bring her in.
I was more impressed that you had a prop with you, mate. You're like the sort of carrot top of sales. I was really impressed with that. Matt, you and I have spoken in depth about this, both like in podcast recordings and conversations as well. I know you've got really developed thoughts into this, and obviously some of this feeds into the research that you've done recently and with Jolt Effect as well. What's your thoughts on it?
Yeah, it does feel a little bit like piling on, because I agree completely with my esteemed co-panelists here. And I might point out three things. I was sort of jotting down some notes here in advance, and there's a lot, I think, that leads to that number, right? The 72% of people want a rep-free buying experience. I think the first one I would point to is what we've been talking about here, which is the propensity of salespeople to show up and throw up and still believe this is the golden age of the talking brochure salesperson, right? As Anthony said, and that's all the stuff that's already on your website, right? That's why you got the meeting. You don't need to regurgitate it. It doesn't add any value. I think it's also interesting, though, when you talk to customers, they don't love what replaced it either, which was for a long time was the what's keeping you up at night approach to sales, which is like, I'm going to come in and ask you these big questions, and I'm hoping that you say something that I can hook my value prop to. As we talked about in the Challenger research, the best salespeople are focused less on, they're certainly not showing up and throwing up, and they're definitely not coming in and asking the customer what's keeping them up at night. They do ask great questions, of course, it's critical in sales, but they lead with an insight that ties to their value proposition. As Anthony said, they're not starting with their company or with their product. So they're actually, instead of asking what's keeping the customer up at night, they're showing the customer what should be keeping them up at night. It's provocative. It reframes the way they think about their business, how to make money, save money, mitigate risk, steal market share, engage employees, whatever the outcome is. But it's surprising. So I think that's the first one. I think the second one is that still a lot of salespeople today believe that it's the customer's job to coach them on how to sell to the customer's company, as if the customer has any idea how to buy your solution. In a lot of cases, they're never going to buy this stuff more than once in a career. They have no idea who should be involved, what should happen, how it should unfold. So best salespeople, we learned in the research, actually coach the customer on how to buy. They don't ask the customer to coach them on how to sell to their company. So they're much more like Sherpas and guides through what is a painful journey in a confusing journey for the customer. And then the last one you mentioned before around the Jolt effect. So this is the more recent research. I think salespeople have grown up in this world where they believe that when the customer hesitates, and by the way, we all know there's a lot of that going around today, and they want to kick the can down the road, delay that big purchase decision, it must be because we didn't create the urgency. We didn't create the burning platform. We didn't provide the compelling discount. We didn't dial, as we talk about, we didn't dial up the FOMO, right? The fear of missing out. The customer still believes that their status quo is good enough. Like what you're talking about is not a more compelling alternative, or this is not a top priority. And so they go back and they go to town and they dial up the FOMO. And what we found is that it's actually not the fear of missing out that keeps customers from moving forward. It's the fear of messing up. It's the FOMO.
Right.
The not safe for work version is the FOFU. I'll let your listeners figure out on their own what that stands for, but it's a family program. But this is, and so best salespeople understand, look, I understand the status quo is a big enemy. I know people are lazy. They don't want to change. It takes a lot to get the customer to move forward. But once they are convinced that the status quo is suboptimal and that I'm the partner to move forward with, what they start obsessing about is not whether to work with you, but how to work with you. Have they done enough research? And do you have my back? Or am I going to look like a fool for plunking my badge on the table in lobbying for this purchase? And so so you got to shift gears into almost shifting from salesperson to becoming more of a buyer's agent, right? How do I help you instill the confidence, help you feel great about this decision, and act as a trusted guide on this journey?
Just to linger on the diagnosis a little bit longer, because I do feel some sympathy for salespeople, because we're talking about it as if they're acting on their own accord. Where actually it's often like an organizational capability that they're pushing on to the sales manager and then onto the salesperson as well. I suppose the question from your experience, because I get this in my practice all the time, where you start working with a head of sales, it's like, well, actually it's the organization that's pushing this down. Mm-hmm. How much responsibility does the business need to take? But more importantly, why are they not seeing the wood through the trees from this? Why are we not saying, well, look, let's hit the brakes on this crazy mass emailing that we're doing at the moment, and actually start building out a more coherent strategy, working closely with marketing, et cetera, et cetera. Why is that not happening, do you think? And feel free to take it if someone's got an opinion.
I don't, I want to hear what Anthony and Todd have to say on this one, but I think, have you guys seen that? I've been sharing this with sales rooms. I'm going to do it in about an hour with the group I'm with today. Have you guys seen that thing that went around the internet, which is this kind of visual or mental trick where it says, look at all these paper plates, they're all upside down except for one. See if you can spot the one that's right side up. And when if you guys haven't seen this, go Google it. Don't do it now, do it after the event. But you find the one that's right side up, and then it says, now look at them again, and they all appear right side up. So it's this total, and you're like, what kind of dark magic is this? But it's just it's a power of suggestion kind of thing, right? And I think if we live in this world where everyone around us is saying it's about, understanding what the customer, keeping the customer up at night. It's all about top of the funnel and lead gen and, spamming our customers to death. It's all about beating the status quo. If you live in that world, then you don't know any better. But I think as you get into it and you study what customers are doing and you bring data to bear, you realize there's actually a lot more to it than that. And the best salespeople always figure out what's wrong with the current system, and everyone's going left, they go right, and they figure out a way. We never, and again, I, as I said earlier, I'm not a sales guy. I have a ton of respect for people who do this profession. I just study it and write about it. I'm an anthropologist, as Anthony said, but best salespeople figure this stuff out. We just kind of give language to it. But if you want to understand what's the better approach, study what the best salespeople are doing that's different from what your company is telling everyone to do. And you'll find that they're zigging when everyone else is zagging.
Well, that was the challenge of Sale, right? I mean, that you were looking at the edge cases and saw how they were successful, which is great. Todd, Anthony, you got anything to add? Todd, you're poised to give us a nugget. Go on.
Well, no, I'm just thinking about so much that Matt said, that there was a couple of things, like he talked about being a Sherpa, and part of being a Sherpa is setting proper expectations. So when you show up, you know what you're getting yourself into. A lot of what I see around losing to the status quo has to do with a misset of expectations, knowing two things. Number one, that every buyer has got 100 priorities they could work on, but can really only focus on 5 at a time. And that idea that when expectations are misset, it's very easy for us to bias our perception of a reward. And what I mean by that is, I told this story a million times about, my wife and I, our two kids, we were out. My wife's like, hey, should we go get some ice cream? And the kids are like, I'm like, they go crazy. We drive over to the ice cream place and there's 14 cars in the drive-through line. Now, for my wife and I, we're like, the reward is the ice cream. We're there, the money's in our pocket. Like, we are a fully BANT qualified, or whatever the bad old qualification criteria is. We are there. But within 2 minutes, my daughter leans forward and she's like, hey, can we just go home? Really? And then my son's like, I just want to go play some Minecraft. Like, this isn't worth it. And we backed out of line. Now, if we would have known there was 14 cars in line when we made our decision, we would have stayed, like you would at Disneyland for It's a Small World in May, right? Like, it, that's your expectation, you do it. But when the expectation is misset, that's when you get trouble, right? And when you choose the status quo, the people in Culver's or whatever ice cream place weren't sitting there going, what's wrong with them? Like, they were here and then they ghosted us, screw them, right? And so, like, that's the key. The one thing I wanted to just ask about that Matt had said is this idea that your buyers are only buying a solution like this once, twice in their career. Consensus selling, hard. Consensus buying, harder. Yeah. But in the current environment, when so much of our consensus buyers, they're still hybrid or remote, hasn't consensus buying just gotten infinitely harder in the last 2 years which is driving more of this status quo?
Yeah, I think so. I think Zoom is like the particle accelerator of buying committee growth. It's like, there's no downside. You just send the demo link to everybody, right?
Anthony, was there you wanted to add?
You handing it to me?
Yeah,
I want to go back to something that Matt said. I think, and now I have to go full nerd to try to keep up with Todd, which is not easy to do, by the way. So far, I've discovered that. 1965, in a magazine called Horizons, Alvin Toffler said, the rate of change is going to get so accelerated that human beings are going to be dislocated and they're going to be racked with uncertainty. They're going to have psychological problems. They're going to have sociological problems. This was in 1965, which I would imagine felt a lot slower than it feels right now. Yeah. So when you start talking about a decision that somebody makes once or twice in their life, and they have to get it right, you understand why they want a different experience. And I would say what they want is expertise. They want somebody who's got experience. They want somebody who can lead them through that buyer's journey on their own, because they can't do it on their own, and they know that. They want somebody that understands their industry. And so the sense-making thing that is very popular right now is because you can't make sense of all of the inputs that are coming in and all of the news stories and everything that's going on in all of these industries in this. Well, when my hair looked like Aaron's, I would say AC/DC was my go-to. I was a great Bon Scott, but now I use AC/DC for accelerating constant disruptive change. If that is where you are, if that's the environment, that's the water that you're in, then you're going to have a difficult time making a decision unless there's somebody who actually can guide you through that decision making, including like weigh these factors more than this one because you're doing it this way. And I know your friends are doing it the other way, but you can't do that because. And that's what they're looking for, somebody who can give them the information. And Brent recently on LinkedIn, which he does quite often, he said something about giving them confidence. I'm not sure it's confidence. That's part of it. I think it's certainty. When I'm making this decision and it's strategic and it's going to have an impact on my business for good or for ill, I want somebody who can make this decision with me. And Chris Beal from Connect and Sell, I stole this from him. He said, people buy from people they trust more than they trust themselves to make the decision. So that's what they're doing. They're trying to find somebody who can help them make the decision.
I like actually, just to piggyback on what Anthony's saying, would never get to, this is like, you guys remember in Back to School where Rodney Dangerfield takes the exam and it's like, I've got one question in 48 parts. This is like, we're never going to get through the first question, but it's a really good question you asked, Aaron. So Anthony, I think is onto something here. I agree, Anthony, that I used it before. I don't love the confidence term either. Because you can be very confident that you don't know what the hell you're doing. But I like the idea of self-efficacy, which is I now feel empowered, maybe confident I'm going to make the right decision, right? Or certain, as you said. I like that term too. That's a really good one. One thing I'd point out, I think there's at the root of a lot of this stuff, and I think at the root of that data point is a problem in sales, which is that we've always dealt with in sales, but I think it's gotten a lot worse. And Anthony hit on this, and we talk about this in sales I've talked about it for 50 years now, the fact that the customer wants a trusted advisor, but I don't know that we've ever really been precise around what that means. And what we found is kind of interesting. So if you get down to like things that happen in the sale and things that best salespeople say versus what most salespeople say, I think best salespeople understand before the customer even says hello, before the first Zoom even starts, you are suffering, you're pin deep in your own territory. The customers come to that conversation with a lot of baggage from past experiences where they've been oversold, where the salesperson's put one over on them, they've hid the dirty laundry. They come to this, they suffer, there's this effect of the principal agent dilemma, right? Which is an information asymmetry problem. And I believe as a customer that you as a salesperson are paid to oversell me, not tell me what doesn't work about your solution. You're not going to put me on the phone with any customers who hate you guys. You're not going to tell me this stuff that doesn't work, all this stuff. You're going to sell me more than I need all these bad things. So it's a cat and mouse game. And so it's me against you. And my job is to figure out what you're hiding from me. And so what best salespeople have done in those moments, I think, is they built up this bank of goodwill by proactively telling the customer, being brutally honest with them, saying, you know what, I don't think you need the premium version of our solution. I'd love to sell it to you, but it's not necessary for your use case. Or I don't think you need to roll this out enterprise-wide. Let's start small, less pressure on you, easier to get approval for this, get some runs on the board and expand from there. Or how about this? You know what? Like, I gotta be honest with you, that's a pretty new feature in our platform. It's not quite ready for prime time. I don't want you to build your whole business case on that and then be disappointed when it doesn't work. It'll be great in 6 months, but right now it's a little bit rocky. Or, you know what? I'd love to sell to you, but I gotta be honest, based on what you're looking for, our competitors are actually a lot better at this than we are. When reps do those things, they are building up a bank of goodwill that they can later cash in on, but it teaches the customer, my job here is not to oversell you or hide the ball. My job is to get you to a great decision. But most salespeople, very few salespeople in our analysis, there's 2.5 million sales calls, actually did stuff like that. The other thing, so the other part of that's the trust piece. The other part is being an expert or an advisor. And I think the reality is that most salespeople, and this is probably hot take on popular opinion, are in no position to advise customers on the decision because they haven't invested the time to get to know their solution or their product or their industry or their market or their use case.
It's worse than that, Matt. They don't have any business acumen. Like, you can't be a business advisor and say, I'm going to tell you how to run your business, and I don't know anything about business except for buy my solution.
Or show up with the clown carve experts who will do it for me, right? So,
it's really interesting, right?
Can I pivot this to Todd? Because I have something. I think information disparity is how you educate the client to make a good decision, because you have this knowledge and experience, because we go sell that thing that they buy once every 10 years. We sell it every single day. So we know where all the pitfalls are. And so they're looking for somebody that does that. But in the past, since Todd is our historian here, like, that information disparity was how you won. Like, I'm going to hide all these things from you, and then you're going to figure out later on that I bamboozled you. And then people go, like, why did salespeople get a bad reputation? Well, because we hid things. And now we are teaching you those things. And that's the value creation, I think, that most buyers actually expect and what they want.
The challenge,
it's not what they get, but that is what they want.
Yeah, the challenge we have, right, and again, right, if you think about the last generation of sellers and the new generation of sellers, this thing around we're only training people on product and not training them on market expertise has slowly been creeping in basically since the birth of the internet. What we have now is a massive, almost of like apocalyptic proportions, knowledge gap with sellers. So if you grab an average seller now and ask them genuine questions around business, around their marketplace, around, like business acumen, they don't have the knowledge, right? So we're facing a challenge at the moment, which is this thing that the customer is craving so much, which is expertise, knowledge, the icebergs in the distance, like someone who's lived and breathed the experience for the last year. And then you've got the seller who's like, well, I can show you my product and I can see how good our product is against a competitor. So let's move into the diagnosis then. How do you feel we solve this challenge? And no one's allowed to say sales enablement. How do you think we solve this challenge of getting reps to come off the hamster wheel, which is always going to be running because we've always got target pressure, you know, investors breathing down our neck, and turn them into experts in those 3 or 4 fields really, really quickly? How do we actually do that? How do we hit the brakes on them?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much there. You know, first of all, my favorite sales quote of all time, 1919, Arthur Dunn said, "If the truth won't sell it, don't sell it." Right. And like that whole piece was the impetus behind me, like a lunatic, quitting my job and writing the transparency sale, was that idea that when we talked about buyers know more nowadays, and how this idea that the sales profession is going to go away, but the opposite has happened. It's because more information hasn't made it easier for buyers. It's made it harder. And if the future salesperson's able to come to the table, like Matt said, and present our solutions truthfully, right, and lead with those things that we give up to be great at our core. I mean, it's why all of you that are on this read reviews before you buy something you haven't bought before. But more importantly, it's why all of you read the negative reviews first, right? You skip the 5s, you go to the 4s, 3s, 2s, and 1s, because that's what triggers decision-making. So A is to do the homework for the buyer, right? Like bring that, the pros and the cons, and be their Sherpa instead of that necessary evil. That's number 1. Number 2, Aaron, you're going to hate me for this, but I'm going to bring up Chat GPT.
No,
all right.
I did make a promise, but go on. We've broken
everybody. When we're done here, go to Chat GPT and just type in, "Why shouldn't I bring in," and then write in your solution for my company, and see what comes up. I'm doing a keynote for a kickoff next week, and I did that. It had a 292-word explanation with 4 bullet points as to why I shouldn't choose that company.
Wow.
Right? That's, if your buyers, I mean, your buyers know how to Google your company reviews and read those, like that's easy. The future is they're going to go to Chat GPT and go, "Why shouldn't I choose you?" You better know that information. You better know what you're up against. And if that stuff's true, lead with it, right? Present your solutions as imperfect. That's the future salesperson doing the homework for the buyer. And then that will speed your sales cycles, increase your win rates, and you'll lose the deals you're going to lose anyway faster. I personally think that's the future.
Brilliant, brilliant. Start with what you're not.
Exactly. And that's why 85% of us read the negative reviews first, because our brain needs to know, is the juice going to be worth the squeeze? And I better know what that squeeze is first. Otherwise, all the nutritional value and taste is going to go right through my brain.
Yeah. I'll get to your questions in a minute, guys. We'll just finish this, but some great comments and questions coming through. Matt, I think you were going to have something there.
No, I think it's great. And I just, I had this total, like my head is spinning now about like, I'm trying to think the last time it's a perfect example of like FOMO versus FOMO is like, we always look for, because what we don't want to do is buy the thing that actually everyone hates, or it's not going to work for us or whatever. So you start with the negative reviews, you rule that out. Nobody starts with the positives. I'm like, oh my gosh, this thing is amazing. And like, I'm going to ignore all those 1-star reviews. Right. So constantly right. It's one of the things I think about, because I get this a lot from sellers. We looked at, if you look at individual companies, I go back to something Todd said earlier about setting expectations. I think it is absolutely critical. So if you look within individual companies, and we looked at recorded sales calls within an individual company, we looked at high performer calls versus average performer calls. A couple of things were true. One, average performers selling the same exact solution as the high performers dramatically overstate the expected benefits. So they anchor the customer on that once in a lifetime case study on the website, right? Where all the planets aligned and everything was perfect and nothing went wrong, which has like never happened in the history of like buying B2B solutions. But they let they anchor them on that. They let the customer anchor themselves on that. Because that's the thing the customer we saw this case study, we're on that webinar, read the web, oh my gosh, it's amazing. And they say, oh, absolutely. Like that stuff happens every day. High performers were much more likely to say, absolutely, we're very proud of that. But I was a part of that team, and I got to tell you, everything went right, which we know in life rarely happens. So I'd rather you set your expectations low. We're going to do at least this together. And I think we have a great chance to overperform. So the seeds of outcome uncertainty and customers wringing their hands about like, I don't know if I can walk into the CFO's office and present a business case based on this, are planted really early in the sales when you miss that expectation. So that was one point. The other one, I get a lot from salespeople who hear this like, boy, you're saying don't show up with the clown car of experts. And this was true. And in the same companies, high performers made far less use of subject matter experts on their team. They did more of their own demos. They did bring subject matter experts, but they used them in a surgical way. They didn't, forgive the militaristic references, but they weren't carpet bombing with experts. It was like, I come in, I've got Aaron. Aaron is our head engineer. Aaron, there's a specific question that the customer had last time. Can you address that? And then we'll have already planned that Aaron's going to fake another call and he's going to leave, because I need the customer to see me as more than a glorified admin, right? And this thing in sales we were all aware of is that if I just show up with a bunch of experts and I say, hey, Aaron, take it away. And Aaron's more than happy to help because he's a product guy. He wants to help, right? He sees as his job to help, but it's really detrimental to me because the customer sees me, you get delegated down to the person you sound like, right? And if I'm just a glorified admin, what value are you bringing? That is a recipe for a customer who's going to do a lot of due diligence, is going to get wrapped around the axle of research, is never going to make sense of all the content out there because they're seeing the salesperson is not that much more knowledgeable than they are. So I think I like what Anthony said earlier, and this is totally true. You've got to understand, even as a new salesperson, understand your source of authority. And the reality is, even if you've been doing your job for 2 weeks, 2 months, not for very long, right? You don't have the 20 years of experience of your tenured colleagues. You talk to more customers about this solution, this technology, this market, this industry every day than they talk to in a year. So you have a source of authority. Doesn't mean you shouldn't rely on other people, but be really careful about over relying on other people and develop a development plan for yourself to become more conversant and become more of an expert about the thing you're selling.
Yeah.
Can I add one quick, just simple thing that I'm seeing companies do? I used to do this when I was leading. The simple shift that you can make. If your reps, when they wake up in the morning, their target list is, I've got 2 financial services, 1 manufacturing, 1 retail, there's no way to get there. Yeah. One of the things that we used to do is we did vertical sprints. And what that meant is, hey, listen, we've had success in aerospace and defense. So for the next 4 weeks, we're going to prioritize those. We're going to bring in a consultant subject matter expert that's going to teach us about what those people care about, what they read, what their inbox looks like, how they're measured. We're going to have marketing put the case studies together for that. We're going to bring in customers. They're going to talk about those things and then develop those vertical sprints and then move out slowly from there. And what ends up happening is that you don't have to restrict territories. Your reps will wake up in the morning going, gosh, I know aerospace and defense. I want to call them first. And all of a sudden they'll see that momentum and then take that knowledge outward, right? And they'll become the experts because they know the language of that customer so much more than if they're spraying their efforts in the morning across 18 different industries. It'll never happen that way.
But the reality of it is that the expertise should be around the market challenges and the impact of those market challenges, right? Now, obviously, business acumen is important. Understanding the kind of macro and micro trends in that market is important. But really, the role of the salesperson is your expertise around the real cutting challenges that are going on in that market. I think, are you going to add anything to the last few points, by the way? Because I think I might have interrupted.
I'll just say, if you want to improve your experience for the customer, the first strategy would be called via negativa. Like you start removing, like you have to remove. Don't start with, Matt, where'd you get those glasses? Those are great, man. You look great. Like we're not going to start with something like that. Don't name your company. Don't talk about your clients. Don't talk about your solutions. Don't talk about products. Don't ask them what their pain point or problem is, because you would just expose yourself as a know-nothing time waster. So the first thing is you have to get rid of those, and then you have to figure out what are we going to replace it with. And it will be something like an industry sense-making session where we're going to explain why this worked for you for the last 7 years and it doesn't work anymore. And it's because these things have changed and you haven't changed with them. That's what I would recommend.
I like the negativa. That's a great term.
Yeah, that's plenty nerdy, Anthony. Don't sell yourself
That's
short.
pretty nerdy.
So guys, I think you're all nerds.
I'm
Let's just
trying
be
to keep
honest.
up with you, Todd. It's
Hey,
hard though. Like
can
your
nerd out with
nerd
the best
spread
of them,
is
Anthony.
high, very high.
No one's turned up for this to see your cool clothes and your cutting quips, right? I think it's because you're all three sales nerds as well, right? By the way, guys, someone's put in the comments, this is so good, I can't believe it's free. So either we need to put pressure on you, make it even better, or we find a way of monetizing it, one of the two.
I'll send a link to Stripe right now.
Yeah.
No problem.
We're doing.
You're the true salesman that you are. Here's a question for you, right? Does this not represent a great opportunity for sellers though, right? Like we're here and we're kind of, you know, seem like sort of three old guys moaning about selling and how bad it is and how rotten it's got. But actually this now represents probably the best time, not only in selling, but actually the best time to raise the profile, the trust, the credibility, and more importantly, the value of the seller at the moment. What do we think about that?
I think you're spot on. I think it's you're right. This is not a bad. This is it. The glass half empty view is there's a lot broken about sales today. We've been talking a lot about that, but the glass half full view is never. I would argue never have customers needed a great salesperson more than they need them today. You know, just one area. So if we look at drivers of indecision, the things customers are worried about messing up or effing up are one, we found in the research, one, they suffer from choice overload. You know, we put roadmap items, configurations, like partner integrations, ecosystems, like contract lengths, you know, enterprise-wide, use case specific, like we put tons of options. We're like bobblehead dolls, like, yes, we do that. Yes, we do that. Yes, we do that. In that world, we know from the paradox of choice work, like customers struggle to make a good choice. The safest choice is to choose none of those options because you don't want to choose the wrong one. The second problem, you know, Anthony talked about this with the sense-making work, is information overload. You know, our customers, I don't care what market you're in, what technology you're selling, what use case you're addressing, there is more, like you can fill like an NFL stadium with all the content out there about you, your competitors, your market, your industry, use cases, like, and that's especially true of big, well-known brands. Like it's multiple, you can fill all the NFL stadiums with all the content, but there's no way your customer's going to consume all this stuff. But they want to. And the reason they want to is they don't trust you to be honest with them. And what they're really worried about is being surprised after the contract is signed, that there's some piece of research they didn't consume that would have avoided them making a mistake, right? That's a bad look for people. And then the third thing that drives fear of failure is, I don't know if we're going to get, it's what Todd talked about. I don't know if we're going to really capture these benefits. Yeah, that sounds great. But Brent talks about the funny thing about this is customers don't blame us as vendors or salespeople. They blame themselves. It's like, you don't understand, our company can't have nice things. Like there's no way we're going to get those benefits. Like we screw this up every day of the week and twice on Sunday. Now, I would argue all three of those things, choice overload, information overload, outcome uncertainty, all those are getting worse. Those are genies that can't be put back in the bottle. We are all putting more options in front of our customers. Like nobody on this call is going to say, oh, our customer's going to the Henry Ford model of like, you can have one color car as long as it's black. Like we're sure that nobody's going to do that. Like we all want more. We want to say yes to our customers. There's more. We can't put the content genie back in the bottle either. It's just growing exponentially. And then the outcome uncertainty. So many of us are moving from selling simple products to selling more stickier, longer term, high dollar value, you know, embedded solutions to our customers. That's really risky when you know, look, how many of us are not, we're all selling transformation. We love selling transformation. Transformation is a double-edged sword. It sounds cool. It makes people really squirm though, because it better go right. Like it's way easier to buy K-cups for the coffee maker than it is to buy a transformative solution that costs a lot of money. Because that in this environment, if it goes sideways, that's your job, right? It's not just a loss of faith. So those things I think are actually getting worse. And I think in that environment, what the best salespeople figure out is that the customer absolutely needs you. They can't choose on their own. They can't make sense of all this content. And they feel a lot of risk, right? You need to be, they're jumping out of a plane by themselves. You want to be that tandem skydiving instructor guiding them to the ground safely, right? Who's been there and done that before. And ensure success.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
I love that. Go on, Todd.
Can I sum that up in one sentence?
I didn't do it, so you should.
This idea for everybody.
Typical anthropology.
Sum that up in the next 30
Well,
minutes.
it's this, like to sum that up, I mean, it's this idea that we as human beings, we don't buy when we're convinced, or if we do, we're probably pissed about it 20 minutes later. We buy when we can predict, right? That's the difference. We don't buy when we're convinced, we buy when we can predict. And if salespeople come at it through that lens that, hey, listen, my job isn't to convince you, my job is to help you predict. what the future looks like and your ability to choose, to achieve not only the outcomes you're hoping for, but from a challenger perspective, achieve more than you ever thought possible. And I'm going to show you that path. And if that's not aligned, cool. Tell me now, right? Versus 3 months from now. Help the buyer predict, stop trying to convince them. And I think the whole game changes.
Yeah.
It wasn't a sentence, just to be clear, Todd, but you did.
But it was shorter than what I said.
I tried. It was just 2 sentences, but all right. I tried.
Anthony.
All I want to say is that when I was a young salesperson and everything went wrong because I sold temporary staffing, which means nobody showed up for work, we shut your business down. That was like a daily occurrence. I had my team with me while I was in a sales call, and I said to the decision maker, we'll probably get this right on like the 4th or 5th try. And he said, how good are you guys? Like, it takes us like 12 to 14 to get anything right here. And then he smiled, like, he's just like, okay, I get it. And I think if we were transparent like that and just say, like, there's a learning curve, it's going to suck for 4 weeks. Like, we're not going to get it done, but it will catch eventually. I think you just get so much goodwill when you're talking to adults in business. And this is business acumen. When I had Coca-Cola and Procter & Gamble as major clients for me, all I noticed was that they have many more difficult problems than anybody I've ever seen. And it's the scale that gets them those sort of things. So when you talk to them, then you sound like a business person. Like, yeah, we do have problems and you're going to have problems. And what are you going to do about them? And then you're in pretty good shape if you do that. You don't have to hide from any of that stuff. I think
that's super important. Look, I think I think one of the things that we went is just, I feel like I'm piling on a lot of what these guys are saying, but this is really important. I think is acknowledging the pain of the journey and the pain of change. So we always like to say, like, oh, challengers are really good at showing the pain of same is worse than the pain of change. Like, that's really great. But it's not that they don't acknowledge the pain of change, or a great salesperson doesn't acknowledge that. They do acknowledge that, as Anthony's saying. Look, this is going to be hard. Like, it's probably not going to go perfectly. But we're right there with you. We've done this before. We know where the pitfalls and landmines are, and we've got your back. And we're gonna follow a playbook. And as soon as things start to slip, like, trust me, we're gonna be right there with you to make sure we don't slip too much. We get traction. We learn from those mistakes, and we move forward. It's that admitting that stuff doesn't work or things aren't going to be all rosy is something that it takes a lot of confidence to do that as a seller. But best salespeople are very confident in telling customers that. And actually, I think their honesty, you saw this in the comments too, that honesty and that transparency, to borrow Todd's word, that those things really, really stick with our customers. It makes them remember us, and it deepens that trust, right? When we're not just saying, yep, we can do that, we can do that, everything's going to be great, works out of the box, no problem. When we're actually a bit more transparent and honest with them, it actually cements that our status as a trusted advisor for them.
You don't really have to worry about piling on like this. Todd and Aaron and I got all of these ideas from Chat GPT this morning.
So there's probably people sitting there listening to this going, yeah, well, obviously honesty is important in sales. Obviously transparency is important in sales. I think one thing that we neglect to really call out is that there is a tremendous amount of pressure on salespeople. And the next question is going to be about the economy, because I think it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. When you put that downwards pressure on the seller, and it's very rarely the seller's fault, because there's probably downwards pressure coming from the manager, because there's downwards pressure coming from the CEO, where there's downwards pressure coming from the VC firm that's really pulling the strings in the business. This creates the perfect storm for those types of behaviors to happen. Desperation, rushing to the end, looking at the numbers being the end thing that they have to get. Do we feel that we need to, again, I keep talking about this, and I'd love to get your opinion on this. Can we hit the brakes? Can we actually hit the brakes with these businesses, particularly with the downwards pressure of the economy? Is it possible for businesses to go, look, we're going to reform the way that we sell?
Yeah, there's a bunch there. Again, there's a couple of things that have to happen from a leadership perspective to make this work. One of the things I did mistakenly in revenue leadership forever is this idea of, hey, at all times, reps, you need to have 4x your quota and pipeline. But what did that create? It created this mound of 4x of crap, right? And so, like, first of all, is if you're still talking that way, the question you should be asking is, why is it 4x and not 2x? And if we use and lead with transparency, you will qualify in better, but you'll qualify out faster the deals you're going to lose anyway. So that's number one, is stop it with the pipeline load crap and look at that ratio and figure out your data around how long it's taking you to lose. If it's taking you a long time to lose, you're not being transparent up front, right? So that's number one, get that time back for your team. Number two is something that, like when I joined my last company, my CEO was very old school. Hope he's not listening. He was like, hey, if you lost the deal, you must have gotten outsold, right? And the punishing would happen. What would happen as a result? Well, all of a sudden the deals in our CRM, the close date would move out a year instead of it being moved to close lost, or it would suddenly go to an unqualified state. Oh, what happened? So when I came in, I tried to change the whole dichotomy as quickly as possible. I did something dramatic that he didn't like, but we had a rep that lost a big deal that he'd been working on for 6 months. When he lost that deal on a Friday, we brought everybody into a conference room. We got champagne and we celebrated his loss. Not only for the effort, because he's already getting hit in the pocket, but we celebrated it for the lessons that could be learned.
Yeah.
We had to create an environment where we know why we're losing. We celebrate the lessons learned and we stop losing for the same reasons over and over again. And that starts to inform what transparency is on the front end. And as a result, during tough times, we were winning more. Our ratio of pipeline to close went up. And the most important thing is, like we were all talking about, you start to differentiate in the way that you sell, especially if you're in a commoditized space.
Yeah.
Man, doing this, you will stand out because there's what, 339 people on here? The other people aren't doing this yet.
But that's a really interesting point, because I think we forget sometimes that the value add can be the experience we give the customer through the sales process itself, right? And I think that's something that's been lost in selling, because we've commoditized even the process that we take buyers through. You know, you're going to speak to an SDR, you know, you're going to speak to an A, you know, you're going to speak to a value engineer, you know, then you're going to be passed over to XYZ. You're going to ask me the same 6 questions, but we can create value in the experience. But again, that's an organizational capability. And if it's an individual doing it on their own, then Matt will find you in his research and write a book about you, no doubt. But
can I comment on Todd's 400% of pipeline?
Yeah.
So your major strategy is lose 75% of the opportunities we create. Great strategy. Instead of moving the effectiveness up, I'll just lose a lot more. Not a great strategy for
anyone. Well, yeah, if your goal is to be average, that's the average. Good luck.
It comes back to, sorry, go on, Matt.
Yeah, we this is like a kind of a random data point, but it's exactly what Todd and Anthony are talking about here. Sort of if you think about the difference between the graphical representation by opportunity count at different stage of a pipeline is so different from an average performer versus a star rep. If you look at an average performer, it looks like that classic funnel shape. It's a lot of opportunities in stage 1, then slightly fewer in stage 2, and so on and so forth. Then you get to a smaller number at stage 5, you know, or closing. If you look at a graphical representation of a high performer pipeline, it doesn't look like a wedge, it looks like a nail. So it's got a lot of opportunities early on, and then they aggressively disqualify in work. It's like the Jerry Maguire school of like, and as Anthony's saying, it's like, I'm gonna be much more effective on a chosen set of opportunities versus just kind of letting stuff fall out because it should never have been there to begin with. So they know their time's their scarcest resource. They disqualify aggressively. And I think one of the things that more recently that has impressed us when we talk to high performers is they will say, look, the customer's got to be able to buy. The classic qualification, disqualification criteria are still relevant, but they're disqualifying and qualifying at a much deeper level, which is not just the ability to buy, but the ability to decide.
Yeah.
Like, and I actually
and they continue to
exactly
qualify the whole time through the whole thing. That's what most good reps do. Is they're constantly making sure we can get to the next step.
And you know, it's funny because Anthony, you asked, or sorry, I don't know if you asked, or Aaron, you might have said something about, I think we were talking about the macro, maybe the signals we send from leadership, Aaron. In creating this environment, I think that's one of the problems is that we've created this environment to like this never give up, like hope springs eternal. The customer didn't say no, so they might say yes. So let's float it to the top of their inbox. Let's stay in front of them. Let's do the change of voice strategy. Let's like throw a discount at them. And, you know, like, I don't know that that's a behavior that necessarily should be rewarded, that stick-to-itiveness all the way to the end. And we celebrate that stuff. But I actually think, Todd, what you're saying is like, get the bottle of champagne out when we made the really hard call that this is over, it's not going anywhere, and our time is better spent elsewhere. Put them in a drip campaign, put them on the back burner, get to them later. And being able to spot that early is a really rare skill, and it's a very, very hard call. This is autobiographical. I probably shouldn't say this in front of 339 people, but this often reminds me of like these lost, no decision losses remind me of my dating life in college, where like the relationship was over, but it took me like 3 months to figure out it was over. And I think sales is a lot like that.
Note to self, Matt was not good with women early in his.
How you about this show your wife as well, Matt?
Dude, let's go.
So here's a question, right? And I think it's probably going to be our last question. What responsibility does the buyer have in this, right? So we're talking a lot about the seller and how the seller needs to change, but buying is as screwed up as selling, right? What do you see the shift being in buying from the way that they organize themselves as businesses, the way they break down silos, the way they're more forensic when it comes to looking at where they put their budget, how they analyze challenges within their organization? And again, this is the same whether someone's buying a service or whether they're buying a piece of software or a widget for a piece of manufacturing, right? How do you think this is going to change for buyers? Is it going to force change with what's going on in the economy and people are being more scrutinizing more over budgets?
I'll just take 1 minute on this one. I don't think that they think enough about what they need to do internally before they start having some of the conversations that they have. And because I sell, I know that a lot of times, like there's a whole bunch of people that are going to be in the room at the final presentation that if they're not there at the beginning of this, they have no understanding of why we were talking about what we're talking about. And I think that they need a better concept internally about how they go about buying, who needs to be in the room, who doesn't need to be in the room when these things happen. And I think I've done this for a very long time. In the Lost Art of Closing, that book is about controlling that process and making sure that they understand they have to have these conversations, even though they don't want to have them. But if they don't, then they never get what they want.
I mean, a large part of buying is organizing people around the common problem and the impact of that problem and prioritizing that problem as well. And then finally putting budget aside to solve the problem. Todd, is there something that you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's this idea that it's going to be really hard to get buyers to change, right? Especially from where we are. But the magic is transparency begets transparency. I mean, you'd be surprised that when you share unexpected honesty, how suddenly trust levels go up and you find that your buyers are sharing more. Like if you want to actually influence how buyers act during the journey, be transparent and watch what happens. Like the examples of me on the buying end going in, like I bought a car and I walked in and I did the 3 things they tell you never to do when you're buying a car. A, don't tell them how you intend to pay. B, don't tell them that you've got a trade-in. And C, for goodness sake, if there's a problem with the trade-in, let them find it on their own. In the first 1 minute, I shared all 3 of those. You know, I've got it, like I'm ready. I've got a trade in, and see that smoke swirling in the parking lot? That's from my car. The check engine light wasn't just on, it was flashing. And what happened within 15 minutes, this sales rep shared his issues with his father, his ADHD, how he hated his job. And I finally used it for evil, not good. And I said, how do you guys get paid? He pulled out his comp plan and I got to read his comp plan. Point being that on both sides, transparency begets transparency. If you really want to influence buyers, lead with transparency and watch the magic happen.
Interesting.
I think it's really brilliant. You know, somebody said to me a long time ago, I think when I was maybe struggling with a coworker in some former job, and I think my boss said something like, you know, you can't change other people, you can only change yourself. So, and I think in some respects that's true here too. We ask the question, what's the buyer's responsibility? I think buyers suffer from the Dunning-Kruger effect of like, they think they're empowered. So they think they know how this is gonna get bought. They think they have the juice to get it done. They think they can sway and influence other people. You know, one of the things I think that transparency tactic that Todd's talking about is really powerful. I'll share really quickly. You know, one of the things we talk about with Jolt is judging the level of indecision. This is a pretty interesting technique. It's actually not in the book, came out afterwards. We blame the publisher for forcing us to like get the manuscript done. But this was interesting. We dug into these sales calls. They're doing exactly what Todd talks about here to get the fear of failure on the table with the customer early so that they don't, because if you ask your customers, how many of you think you're decisive decision makers and executives and managers? 100% of them will say yes. The data tells a very different story. It turns out 87% of them are at least moderately or highly indecisive. Decisive people are the exception, not the rule. Customers don't like talking about that though, because it's embarrassing. They don't want to talk about how they're worried how they'll look to their boss or their team, or maybe I'll get fired if this just goes sideways. They will not talk about that stuff. So what best salespeople have used, they don't use open-ended questions like, hey, Aaron, are you worried about getting fired for buying our solution? Or because it's like not the best question. They also don't rely on verifiers. Those are important too. Like, Aaron, are we ready to move this on to legal for review? Sure, we can, but it doesn't get at the fear of failure that might submarine the deal later. But what does is this technique we call pings and echoes, which is I try to articulate in a way that contextualizes it, makes it okay to talk about it. This fear I think you're struggling with. Like, Aaron, I put a lot in front of you. I'm just trying to read the tea leaves here, but I'm picking up the sense that maybe you're not 100% sure everything looks great and you're not 100% sure where you start with us and what should be in the initial proposal. And more importantly, what should you say no to? What's the nice to have and the need to have? By the way, every single customer who is at this stage in the purchase process with us suffers from the same exact problem. And that can really cause things from moving forward. So I'd love to have an open, transparent dialogue about what matters and what doesn't. What can you put to, and let's talk about that. But how'd I do? Like, are you worried about that at all? That kind of transparency gets you to say, yeah, absolutely. Like we can't have it all. Like budgets are limited, time is limited, resources are limited. I got to make some tough decisions here. Can you help me out? What do other people do? Or it might get no, that's not it at all. I totally know what we should buy. I'm actually worried about that 10x ROI you're projecting. Like we can't have nice things. There's no way I cannot put that in front of the CFO. I'll get laughed out of his or her office, right?
What was the coworker Brent?
Yeah,
I thought it was. Yeah, it had to be. There's no way.
Sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
It was the co-worker Brent that you were struggling with.
Yeah, was that the story? We had to bring it in somehow, right?
So we've only got a few minutes left, but I mean, if I could get a short answer to this, it'd be really, really valuable. This is for everyone who's obviously attended. Like, if we could do one thing to make a positive change, and I know this sounds really corny, and I end my webinars with this, but it is corny, but there's often a gem in here that people can take away with them. If there's one thing that people can do today that's going to increase their credibility, their value in the buyer's eyes, and actually make them more successful, what advice would you give? Todd, let's start with you.
I'd be remiss if I didn't pull out that quote I talked about earlier, right? From 1911, The Art of Selling. Arthur Sheldon said, true salesmanship is the science of service. Grasp that thought firmly and never let go. We need to get back to understanding that our profession is a service profession, and that service you provide is to do the homework for the buyer and to help them predict. Your job is not to convince them. Your job is to provide a service and help them predict. I think if you start there from that mindset, things are going to get a lot easier.
Brilliant. Really good. Matt, over to you.
I love that. I think it's fantastic guidance. I would say a specific one, so as not to just reiterate what Todd said, but I would 100% agree with what he said. I would say before when your customer starts to hesitate, and this again happening a lot right now, if things start to slip through your fingers and that customer's starting to ghost you and disengage, don't assume it's a value problem and that I failed to create the burning platform and I failed to convince them. I need to go back and hammer them, because you have a high probability of actually making things worse. If they're worried about failing, if they're convinced they're going to succeed, but instead they're worried about not failing and not messing up, any amount of dialing up that FOMO is going to backfire on you, because you're using scare tactics to sell to somebody who's already afraid. But they're not afraid of missing out, they're afraid of messing up. And understanding that, at least hitting the pause button, and that's hard because you exist in a world where you've been told it's a value problem. It's a value, but you haven't convinced them. But again, you're your own worst enemy in some of those moments, to hit the pause button and try to dig deeper into what actually the customer is really worried about.
Yeah, I remember in the book, I think it says it jumps up to 84% when you use those tactics, which is crazy, the indecision. And Anthony, over to you.
The writer Kurt Vonnegut, when he was teaching in Iowa, told his students, pity the reader. And that was his number one commandment. And I think for salespeople, like with the legacy approach, pity the buyer, like pity them. Like they don't need to hear any of this anymore. We can move on and we can just go immediately start creating value for them. That's the best thing that you could possibly do if you want to pity the buyer.
Brilliant, brilliant. Look, before everyone jumps off the webinar, I'm just going to ask you guys where they can find your work and what you're up to at the moment, where they can follow you. If you have enjoyed this webinar, feel free to follow these guys, follow Flow State, follow me. We're trying to do one of these a month, and we'll continue to create content that gives you the value that hopefully you've got today. And I know I've got a ton of learnings for this, so thanks to you guys. So Todd, maybe we'll start with you. What's the best way of people getting hold of you and getting hold of your brilliant books as well?
Well, thank you. It's pretty easy to find. I'm a Google search away. So toddcaponi.com. I speak, I teach revenue organizations and their leaders. The books are available anywhere you find them. The Transparency Sale and the new one, The Transparent Sales Leader.
Brilliant. And Matt, over to you.
Yeah, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, maybe not as active as Brent, but as you do better, but I'm on LinkedIn a lot. So that's a great place to get a hold of me. DCM Insights is our company, and jolteffect.com is a place you can learn more about the new research. There's some free tools on there as well, manager coaching tools, et cetera, that you might want to download, take advantage of.
And from your hotel room, people now know that you're open to keynotes and SK.
Right. Somebody asked me this morning where I'm from, and I said seat 3C. If I'm lucky, sometimes it's seat 31C. We'll see.
Lastly, Anthony, over to you.
thesalesblog.com or LinkedIn. Either one of those will do it.
Awesome. Make sure you follow all of these guys. We're really lucky to have them. Thank you three so much. I really appreciate it. It's been incredibly valuable. Hopefully we get to collaborate again and again. Cheers, guys. Take care. See you all really soon. Au revoir.
Thank you.
Take care, guys.